Hello and welcome. Today we're going to dive into a really critical but maybe a little misunderstood part of the carbon markets, Verra's Exemption Request Procedure. You can think of it as a kind of emergency lifeline for projects that get hit by a totally unavoidable crisis. But how does it really work? And what are the rules? Well, let's break it all down. So, picture this. Your carbon project is going great, everything's on track, but then, just weeks before a huge deadline, a flash flood completely washes out the only road to your site. That critical site visit from your auditor? Yeah, it's impossible now. So, is your project just done for? Is it completely derailed? It's a scary thought, right? Well, this exact kind of high-stakes scenario is what this procedure was built to handle. So, to make sure we get a really clear picture, here's our roadmap. We're going to start with the why, the purpose behind it all. Then we'll look at what you can, and more importantly, what you can't ask for. After that, we'll dig into the make or break extraordinary test. Then we'll walk through how to actually submit a request. And finally, we'll see how Verra makes the final call. All right, first up, why does this procedure even exist? It's so important to get this right from the start. This is not a get-out-of-jail-free card. Not at all. It's a very carefully designed safety valve made specifically for projects that are facing a true, unavoidable crisis that is just completely and totally out of their control. And you might be wondering, who does this cover? Well, it actually applies pretty broadly across the whole Verra ecosystem. So whether you're working in the classic Verified Carbon Standard or JNR, CCBS, SDVista, or even the plastic program, this is a tool that could potentially be relevant for you. It really covers the whole suite of their major standards. Okay, moving on to Section 2. Let's talk about the rules of the game here. Because you can't just ask for an exemption from any old rule. Verra is super specific about what's on the table, and that's really to make sure the integrity of the standards isn't compromised. This slide does a great job of laying out the boundaries. On the left, you've got the stuff that's permitted. Things like extending deadlines or waiving a site visit when it's just physically impossible. But that column on the right, the not permitted one, is just as crucial. You absolutely can ask for an exemption just to save a few bucks, or because you misunderstood a rule, or to get out of a program update. That's a definite no-go. And now we're at the absolute heart of the matter, Section 3, the extraordinary test. Honestly, this is the single most important concept in this whole procedure. Pretty much every single request is going to live or die based on whether it can pass this very, very high bar. So, what does Verra actually mean by extraordinary? Well, the official definition has two really critical parts. First, the situation has to be completely beyond your control. Think force majeure or an act of God. But that's not enough. Second, you also have to prove that there was no way you could have avoided it, even with reasonable planning. So it's not just that something bad happened, it has to be both uncontrollable and unavoidable. This table makes it super clear with some real-world examples. In the acceptable column, you see those huge major events. Natural disasters, armed conflict, that kind of thing. But look at the unacceptable column, because that's really telling. Things like trying to save money, misreading the rules, or even having delays with your own auditor, none of that is going to cut it. And check out that point on COVID-19. Delays from that pandemic are now explicitly considered unacceptable, which is a big change from how things were a couple of years ago. Now, this is a critical rule for keeping the whole program solid. The procedure says, black and white, that any exemptions that get granted do not set a precedent. What does that mean? It means every single case is judged on its own unique situation. You can't just point to another project that got an exemption and say, hey, me too. This is exactly how Verra prevents loopholes and keeps their standards really robust. Okay, so let's say your project is facing a legitimate crisis. You've read the rules and you're pretty sure you meet that extraordinary test. What do you actually do? Well, Section 4 is all about the practical steps for getting your request submitted. The process itself is a pretty clear three-step path. First, you have to find and fill out the official form on Verra's website. Second, and this is probably the most important part, you have to gather strong, verifiable evidence to back up your claim. We'll talk more about what that looks like in a second. And finally, you submit the whole package to Verra. Okay, so this idea of supporting evidence is crucial. What are we talking about here? It has to be objective. It has to be verifiable. We're talking about official statements from government agencies, or maybe official documents about civil unrest from a recognized authority. It could even be a formal negative opinion from your auditor saying they literally couldn't do their job because of the situation. Your word alone just isn't enough. And that brings us to the home stretch, the final decision. You've filled out the form, you've gathered all your evidence, you've triple-checked it, and you've hit send. So what happens next? What's going on over at Verizon's end? From here, the process is pretty methodical. Verra is going to review your entire package, and they might even come back to you with more questions. Once they finish their review, they'll send you a formal decision letter. And here's a really key piece for transparency. If your request gets approved, that decision letter is published on the Verra registry for the whole world to see. So, if you only remember one thing from this whole explainer, let it be this. The Exemption Request Procedure is an emergency lifeline. It's for projects facing truly exceptional, uncontrollable events. It's all about maintaining integrity during a crisis, not about creating a loophole to get around the rules. And really, this all leads to a much bigger question, doesn't it? In a world that seems to be facing more and more unpredictable challenges, from climate disasters to political instability, how do we, as an industry, strike the right balance? How do we maintain these strict, high-integrity standards while also having the flexibility to make sure that good projects can actually survive the storm? It's a fundamental challenge, and procedures just like this one are right at the center of trying to figure that out.